with this whole thing with the Piton management area and the development on Gros Piton, the assertion is that the correspondence between yourself as Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, and Thaddeus Antoine representing the Canadian family that wanted to build there, the assertion is that basically you were the one that set the ball rolling, or you endorsed them building on the property based on the correspondence. It's not how I read it, but at the end of the day, it's not. It's about the spin. So the question is, how do you feel about the whole thing?
The United Workers' Party has been in office now for 4.5 years. This is their final year. And you know what? Every single time that they get into trouble, they land in some embarrassment or the other, they look for a scapegoat. And of course, on this occasion, they have decided that I should be their scapegoat. I will not accept this. I will not tolerate it. And I will not sit down and allow it to happen. I read the statement by Harold Stanislaus, and I couldn't help but come to the conclusion that he is joined the pack in propagating lies and in propagating deceit. Conveniently, of course, he's never told or has not told the whole story in his statement, but I'll come to that in a few minutes. But you know what he does? He has decided at the very end of his statement to publish a statement which I made in a letter to the attorney representing the parties in the transaction involving the lands at Ansivoine. Now you will notice that my letter was very carefully worded, and there was a reason for this, Chris. The fact of the matter is, part of the land that was sold was not in the PMA. Part was in the PMA. And recognizing that part was in the PMA, I worded the letter very carefully to say, quote, subject to the resolution of all outstanding issues regarding the status of that part of the property which falls within the World Heritage Site. So there was no question that the administration was aware that part of the land fell in the PMA, but in any event, there were issues there to be resolved before any construction could take place.
So the assertion is that you should have not given him approved developer status because of that.
Let us be very clear of what approved developer status is. Approved developer status is not approved status to construct a property or put on buildings on the site. No Prime Minister on his own has such authority. Approved developer status under the Special Development Areas Act, and incidentally, Soufrière was always designated as a special development area. That simply meant by its inclusion that approved developer status was granted for the purpose of receiving the concessions under the Act. Incidentally, the concession on stamp duty and, of course, vendor's tax was provided for the benefit of the St. Lucian family, who, of course, had decided that they would sell the land to the Canadian investor. So there's not a question that it was the investor who was getting the benefit of the concessions. Rather, it was a St. Lucian family. And we have to bear in mind that St. Lucians are entitled to own and dispose of their property. But the fact of the matter is that the letter was very carefully worded. It meant that the concessions were only applicable if there were resolution, or if there was a resolution of the issue of constructing close to the PMA, near the PMA, or even within the area within the PMA permitted by the various reports for some kind of construction activity. There was no question of that, about that. But what is interesting, Christopher, is this. Harold Stanislaus chooses in his statement only to cite specific events in the course of this issue. He never makes mention, for example, that in 2018, a residential application by the developer was in fact rejected by the DCA. And of course, the list of approvals is available by the Office of the Planning Department for Public Scrutiny. That denial of the application was in fact crossed over by the chairman of the DCA, marked approved. And what is interesting, of course, is that he makes absolutely no mention of the events from 2019 onwards, when various applications were presented to the DCA by the developer. To the credit of the DCA, they rejected some of these applications, and of course our good friend Harold Stanislaus refuses to explain why is it that the application had to be sent to the cabinet for the cabinet to give approval for the development to take place. Now you are telling me that that is a pious government, a government that of course acted in accordance with strict principles. That's what you want to tell me? Against that kind of background, against that kind of history? They need to explain, for example, whether in respect of the first approval for the residential building, that in fact the PMAC, that is a committee that looks over and protects the PMA, was given the opportunity to comment on that first development. They need to explain all of those things. But I want to just go one step further, Christopher, and add. If this government was pious, as it claims, as I said, if it was that sacrosanct, if it cared for the patrimony of St. Lucia as it said that it was, and mind you, they're accusing me, because I put in language in the approval of concessions, warning that in truth and in fact, you had to resolve all those issues that impacted on the PMA before anything could proceed. In other words, setting the stage for others to follow, to bear in mind that these are the challenges that have to be met. If they were that sacrosanct and that pious, why didn't they acquire the property in the interests of the people of St. Lucia? Even when they were going through the process of approvals for the property, they could have said, all right, we'll do the right thing. We made a mistake with Cabot. We caused enough problems with Cabot. Let's acquire the property. And of course, and do something. Perhaps St. Lucians will feel relieved that at last we have done something in the interest of preserving the environment and the patrimony. That was available for them to do. There's nothing to prevent them from acquiring the property. So all this sanctimonious behavior, in my own personal view, is unjustified, misplaced, and is not really in accordance with the circumstances that prevail. I think what we need to do now is to get into the history of this matter, particularly the events in 2019, which led Cabinet to make the decision that the development must go on. These are the crucial events.